Hi everyone, and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel with Right Side Blonde. Today I wanted to bring you the hot media issue from May of 1997 with Katie Couric on the front. There's a lot of great information in this issue about big media and big politics and how they go hand in hand. And in 2022, we're still having this same issue arise. So why not highlight this magazine today? To begin this week's episode, I'm going to start with the editor's letter written by John Kennedy. It starts out with, "It's all about us. In this, our media issue, we at George do what comes easiest in our business. We talk about ourselves. Lest you think this is a completely self-serving exercise, allow me to share two observations I made of late that suggest why the ever-evolving relationship between big media and big politics is worthy of another look. Not long ago, while waiting to appear on Meet the Press, I was in the green room watching the monitor as host Tim Russert flayed DC's tough luck mayor, Marion Barry. When it was my turn, Russert was quite gentle with me. After all, I hadn't been elected to anything, so I received the polite sort of questioning journalists reserve for their peers, like in those roundtable discussions about the role of the press today, when the panel of press folks solemnly conclude that the media aren't to blame for anything. At the end of the interview, we watched a short clip of an appearance my father had made on Meet the Press some 40+ years ago. 3 resolutely bland, differential men in gray suits lobbed "what do you think" questions, real ones, not declarations posing as questions, at a politician who, by the vaguely bored look on his face, might as well have been fishing. How different it was from the mano-a-mano struggle between Russert and Barry I had just witnessed, an interesting contrast to the present, but not riveting TV. Then I happened upon an article in the New York Times bemoaning the frequency with which politicians were appearing on primetime dramas and sitcoms, not just in cameos but woven into the plot. The story suggested that it was shabby for our leaders to pander to a primetime audience. A century ago, it was deemed undignified for presidents to even give stump speeches. Better to sit in the White House and receive respectable folks at the door and let the good word filter out. Not today. Presidents not only mingle with voters, they invite the generous ones home for a sleepover. The truth is that politics has always been about mingling with the local folks, and a great more of them watch Chicago Hope than C-SPAN. Had New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani never appeared on Cosby, you might never have heard him speak, and I wouldn't have read about him in the entertainment section of the newspaper. In an odd way, politicians become more real by changing contexts and appearing as themselves among all those actors. We take notice, finally. If Jack Kemp does indeed run for president, the least of his worries will be that he appeared on a primetime drama, because for those few moments, millions of Americans stopped and actually listened to what he said. The point is that politicians and journalists must now compete with an abundance of diversions for a share of the fickle public's attention. Exchanges between them must not only inform, they must also entertain. If not, plenty of other things will. Pass the remote, please. It's not surprising, then, that the journalists who have made the most significant marks in the last year or so have been those who animated the news with personality. Sunny or edgy. Katie Couric, known for her effervescence, snagged the most memorable interview of the presidential campaign when she cheerfully hammered Bob Dole about his ties to the tobacco industry. Larry King is celebrating 40 years in broadcasting because he has made his guests comfortable, feeding them questions coated with so much sugar that they barely notice the razor blade nestled inside. Less cuddly but equally compelling are ABC's John Stossel and radio rager Rush Limbaugh, who are also profiled inside. Stossel, whose activist libertarian edge seats him apart from his generally left-leaning colleagues, has become a high-profile figure in television news. Meanwhile, Limbaugh's setting star says less about the changing content of his talk show than the changing disposition of the body politic. We hope you'll also be intrigued by the face-off between the Washington Post's David Broder and Wyoming Senator turned anti-media gunslinger Alan Simpson. If you've ever wondered what really bugs politicians about the press, read it here. And in his second column for George, Tony Blankley joins in the pummeling. In case you think we are different from all those earnest journalistic types seated around a table affirming the infallibility of the media, think again. Read our nifty new national poll and learn that you love us dearly. Now that's news. John Kennedy. Last week I highlighted Tony Blankley's article, and I'm going to do the same this week because I just think they're so important, especially even now. Before I get into Tony Blankley's article, I wanted to show you one little thing I noticed on page 30. It says, "Making America Love. How does your average despot get a good spot in the New World Order?" It's simple. Hire a Washington lobbyist to win absolution for human rights sins. Here's a rundown of who's flacking for the most abusive governments. There are 592 firms currently registered with the Department of Justice as foreign agents for 869 foreign principals. These representatives push for U.S. aid and special trade status despite tyrannical excesses. New World Order, huh? Well, that's just a conspiracy theory. Moving on to Tony Blankley's article, it's called "Shoot the Messengers, Please." "Most reporters in this town are right down the middle," says John Cochran, a Washington correspondent for ABC News, as we debated media bias on CNN's Crossfire not long ago. "Where's the middle?" I responded. "Because in my experience, for most reporters, middle and liberal are one and the same. Over the decades, big media have both cozied up to power and become powerful themselves. In the process, they have lost touch with the public. While this is unfortunate for the media, it is a tragedy in the making for America. A vast and diverse country such as ours needs reliable sources of political news so the public can make its political judgments fairly and accurately." What a concept. Journalism, however, has lost the virtues of its ancestors but preserved their prejudices. Where once it drew its workers from the hardscrabble main streets of America, today it pretends to preach for the little guy even while it drinks out of a golden chalice. That point was driven home to me by Walter Cronkite, the Dean Emeritus of American Journalism. Last year, he was asked if there was a liberal bias in the media. His utterly ingenuous and appalling response: "Everybody knows that there is a heavy liberal persuasion among correspondents. Anybody who has to live with the people, who covers police stations or covers county courts, has to have a degree of humanity that people without that exposure don't have." Let's deconstruct. According to Cronkite, reporters have seen life. Therefore, they are more human than other people. Because they are more human, they are liberal. Thus, liberals are more human than conservatives. But exactly what part of life do millionaire news anchors, correspondents, and producers see from behind the tinted windows of their limousines that escapes the rest of us? Does Peter Jennings see more of life's hard knocks than the 40% of the union workforce that consistently votes Republican? Those men and women live with the people, as Cronkite put it. Indeed, they are the people, and yet they're not liberals. So when conservatives decry a liberal press, they're not just whining. How would you feel having your words and actions reported by an institution so imbued with prejudice it holds that the more human you are, the more liberal you must be? This elite class of Washington, New York journalists possesses a mentality vastly different from that of journalists 50 years ago and strikingly out of sync with the rest of America. For example, although the U.S. is overwhelmingly religious, Americans are 4 times more likely to go to church regularly than Europeans. Big media are indifferent or hostile to faith. The major newspaper bestseller lists, for example, exclude books from religious publishers. Why? It would tell Americans something important about ourselves if a religious contemplative were at the top of the list rather than Howard Stern. Another example. A couple years back, the Washington Post, in a news story, characterized Christian conservatives as poor, uneducated, and easy to command. This statement was not only grossly misinformed, but also bigoted, something neither the reporter nor his editors sensed until after its publication. The majority of Americans are politically conservative or moderate, but Washington journalists are liberal. A 1995 poll by the Roper Center for Public Opinion Research found that 61% of Washington reporters identify themselves as liberal, while only 9% call themselves conservative. In 1992, D.C. reporters voted for Clinton over Bush by 89% to 7%. The public vote was 44% to 37%. In another context, big media recognize that reporters' backgrounds are relevant. Newsroom executives hire blacks and other minorities not just out of a sense of equal opportunity, but because they believe that a white person cannot fairly and astutely cover a minority group. But they hit the brakes in the drive for fairness when it comes to ideological balance. Supposedly, the professionalism of liberal reporters permits them to cover a conservative politician fairly, yet the professionalism of white reporters fails to assure fair coverage of the black community. Perhaps the most persistent prejudice of the liberal media is their view of business as a malignant force in both politics and commerce. In the last Congress, House Majority Whip Tom DeLay met with business people who were victims of excessive federal regulations so that he could be advised how best to design regulatory relief measures. Although DeLay had met openly with reporters, inviting press photographers to the meeting, the Washington Post and other papers reported the meeting in conspiratorial tones. Their stories darkly implied that Republicans were selling out the public to a corrupt and corrupting business community. It is rare to find a news report on such a topic mentioning that an overregulated industry produces less efficiently, hires fewer people at lower wages, and provides goods and services at higher prices to consumers. In contrast, the press would hardly use a sinister tone to report a Democratic representative meeting to craft legislation with members of environmental groups, a common event on the Hill. The media virtually ignored the collusion between Clinton and Big Labor, which spent $35 million last year on behalf of the Democrats. Nor did they focus on the $7.5 million that the Sierra Club spent on Democrats. Let me give you a taste of how this actually plays out behind the scenes. During this great budget battle of the winter of 1995 and 96, my former boss Newt Gingrich, the Republican team, and I were at the White House trying to talk turkey with the president. The GOP Congress had passed a 7-year balanced budget. The president had introduced 4 budgets, all with large deficits. We wouldn't send him the spending bills he wanted, and he vetoed the ones we sent him. The government shut down as a result. After hard bargaining, we finally got what we'd been waiting for. The president agreed to submit a budget that would be balanced in 7 years by the numbers of the Congressional Budget Office. I waddled down to the White House press room where several reporters, including one from the Washington Post, congratulated us for having won this round. I spent the next few hours talking with reporters, bureau chiefs, producers, and editors, buttoning down our win for the morning news cycle. The White House was also out there talking, but it had almost nothing to work with. If you had seen the faces of Al Gore, Leon Panetta, Dick Gephardt, and Tom Dashley before they stepped up to the cameras, you would have known you were seeing the faces of the losers. By morning, however, the major media were headlining that both sides had compromised. Our GOP victory had become a draw. Such bad news judgment put us on the defensive in the final round of negotiations when we Republicans crashed and burned. Did the press play a Republican win as a draw because they succumbed to White House pressure? Or were they predisposed to favor the Democrats, or did they simply lack the courage of their first convictions? I think it was an unholy mix of all 3 factors. Reporting the story straight would have been a body blow to Clinton, and in the Washington media, the Democrats have the home team advantage. In the cool shade of the journalistic seminar, reigning sovereigns of big media glibly construct flattering self-images of incorruptible integrity and vigor. But experience overturns these airy fabrics. And as other sources of news become available, the public may soon see an unreformed big media as an unfit guardian of the public interest. Medieval Europeans were reminded of the urgency to save their souls by an inscription on their sundials. Ultima forsan, roughly, it's later than you think. We could use a few of those sundials in the courtyards of the big media. Another incredible article written by Mr. Blankley, who unfortunately has passed away January 7th of 2012, but his words are living on through these magazines, and they're so fitting for the current times. For anyone with eyes to see and ears to hear, we can see and hear the bias in every news report. It doesn't matter what the news station is, we can hear it. And I think that this has been going on obviously for a long time, since 1997 at least, and probably before, but it's been a good 20-some years, and it's only gotten worse. We have a lot of work to do in the future. A lot of work to do with our media and access to accurate, non-biased information so that we Americans can make up our own minds. Here's to hoping that work begins soon. I hope you all enjoyed this episode of the George Collection. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time.
George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, I mean, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late-night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.